So, how's everyone doing today? We're going to be covering dungeon classes, what class is best for you, and the pros and cons of each class, and a little bit of how you should be playing it and what you should be doing in the party. Let's get right into it. First class we're going to be covering is tank. So, tank, you're going to want to be focusing on EHP as much as possible, sacrificing anything, crit chance, whatever it takes to get as much EHP. Also, another thing that's pretty useful with tank is having a bit of mana. You don't need a ton, but just enough to be able to heal yourself. So, a tank is going to end up doing a lot of puzzles. Since you're not clearing like a mage would, you're going to be wanting to do the puzzles for productivity. And during the boss fight, you're going to be taking the aggro of the boss as much as possible, because any mage or archer or even a berserker that the boss is focusing will die almost immediately, depending on the boss. So you can't let that happen, and you need to keep all of the enemies focused on you for the dungeon to be successful. So anyway, on to the next class. Alright, next is archer class. So archer class, you're going to want to obviously have a bow, and you're going to want to be focusing on crit chance and a little bit of strength. And things like speed are also pretty useful. It's mid damage and the cost is okay. Nothing terrible, but it's not the cheapest. And you're going to want to be focusing on clearing, hence the speed. And also, archers are very good at shredding bosses because of their high damage and good range in general. So something like a Juju would be a pretty good mid to early late game weapon. I don't know much about archer. Don't quote me on the weapons. But something like any bow that you find, like, I would recommend looking up a more detailed guide on archer, but some of the cons are you don't really have as much health as obviously like a tank or a berserker, but that can be fixed with some reforges and things like that, but that will of course sacrifice damage, so you're gonna have to find a balance. So on to the next class. Alright, next class is berserker. So with berserker, you're going to want to be focusing on, of course, melee damage. Something like a livid dagger or flower of truth is pretty good, but actually no, they changed flower of truth. So livid, if you can afford it. Really early game, maybe a zombie soldier cutlass or something like that. It's the cheapest class. It's only really good on the first 3 or 4 floors. A good first class, but you're going to want to pick something else later game. It's not terrible. Good, decent HP. There's a lot of them early game, so it's going to be kind of hard to find a party. And people aren't really going to want you in their party because berserkers are in high supply, especially in those first few floors. And after that, you're not going to be doing enough damage, so I wouldn't really recommend this one for anything above floor 2 or 3. But 4, you could possibly stretch it to 4 if you really wanted to. But you're definitely going to want to just don't spend a ton of money on the set, and have something that you can change and move on from on later floors. Anyway, on to the next class. Alright, next class is healer. This class tends to get a bit of a bad rep for some of them hanging out AFK in the starter room and not really doing anything besides reviving their teammates, which is pretty useful, but they could be doing a lot more for the team, and a lot of people get pretty mad about that. So definitely don't go AFK while healer, especially for the whole game, because people will get very mad at you, just so you know. So healer is good for obviously healing your teammates, and you're going to want to stay away from where there's a ton of enemies, obviously, because you're not great at combat. You could be a semi-hybrid healer, possibly, and do a bit more damage, but that would sacrifice healing, and you're not really going to want to do that. So you're going to want to stay with one of your teammates, maybe a mage or archer, and heal them so that they can do their clearing and you can get your milestones for healing. And during the boss fight, you're probably going to want to stay a little bit away from the boss and use Healing Circle and Wish to heal everyone. So overall, this class is pretty good. The Mender Crown and the Mender Fedora, or the Mender Helmet and the Mender Fedora, are pretty good for early game healer, and you can get them pretty cheaply. So it's not a difficult class to get into, but people will get pretty mad at you for not doing anything, as I mentioned, especially as a healer, because, well, people just don't like healers a lot of times. Because also a lot of people do healer just so they can survive a floor, which is a good use for it, but that's not really helping the team, because in general, if you're doing that, you're only healing yourself. And people get mad about that too. But overall, it's a pretty good class, and I would definitely check out a more detailed guide on it if you want more information. Anyway, on to the next class. Alright, the last class is Mage class, which is my personal class of choice, since it does a lot of damage and is great late game. It also has very little HP. As you can see, I only have 1500, and I run floor 4 or floor 3s, which, I mean, is pretty high for some people. I mean, I can run it during derpy easily, so I'd say that's pretty good. I just think floor 4 is too annoying, but it's definitely a bit of a class cannon, and you're going to want to be focusing on mana, a lot on mana. Some good pets are sheep, and maybe blue whale if you're having a lot of trouble surviving, especially earlier game, because you're not going to need to do as much damage as possible. And you're really good at clearing, so try not to do as many puzzles and focus more on just clearing for the tanks and healers to be doing their puzzles. It's also the most expensive class, which makes it a bit more difficult to get into. Like, my set, like this, is already 20 mil. That's an aspect of the end, so that's not very much. But a lot of this stuff is really expensive, and I'm maybe early to mid-game mage. I don't do much dungeons. Like, I'm Cata 16, so it gets really expensive, like Hyperion, but you're probably not going to do a Hyperion for a long time. Many people don't even get there. So overall, it's a good class, bit expensive, and doesn't have a lot of HP, but excellent for damage and shredding bosses. You just have to be careful of that mana bar. And that'll wrap it up for today's video. I hope I'll see you in the next one. Please like and subscribe.